There we are, we're live, Chair.
Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. We're here at the Economy, Residents and Community Scrutiny Committee, the first meeting of the new council term. The agenda today, the first item on our agenda is the election of a vice chairman. Have we had any nominations, Wyn?
I've had none through by email, Chair, so it's a matter for members to nominate from the floor, please. I've got a recording, a vote set up. I just need some names to put in, and then we'll go for the vote.
So members, open to you. If you'd like to put yourselves forward to be vice chair of this committee, this is your window of opportunity. Form an orderly queue. Okay, so would you like to nominate somebody else? Oh, Carl, thank you, Carl. Would you like to?
I would like to nominate Councillor Adrian Jones if he's willing to go for the job.
Councillor
well, thank you, Carl. But due to my inexperience, I was actually going to say I was going to nominate you, so I'll bounce it back. I think I'm too inexperienced as a new member, and I'm on a couple of committees already. So could I just nominate Carl and bounce that around a bit, please? Thank you.
So Councillor Carl, back to you.
You'd have to wait for a second, did you?
No, first of all, I was just going to check, Carly, would you be willing to stand?
If there are no other nominations, I'm willing to stand, Chair.
Thank you, Carl. So do we have a seconder for the nomination of Carl as vice chairman? Councillor Gary? Are you seconding?
I'll second, Carl.
Thank you very much. And I guess I should ask, are there any further nominations before we have a vote? No other nominations. Are we all happy to vote Councillor Carl as our vice chair?
I think as there's one nomination, Chair, can we ask for people just to put their hands up in the, and I can then see them. Portfolio holders, please don't vote.
There we are. That looks like a full house. Congratulations, Councillor Carl. I look forward to working with you as my vice chair. Thank you very much, everybody. Right, any apologies for today's meeting?
Yes, Chair, I've got one apology from County Councillor Chris Walsh.
Chris Walsh, thank you very much. And item 3, disclosures of interest. So Wyn, if you want to take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. I did send out some guidance to members relating to potential interests. The first one I think we need to cover, which would be a personal interest but not a prejudicial interest, is has any member of the committee received or is eligible to receive, or a member of their family eligible to receive the £150 cost of living grant. And again, if you could put hands up in the, please, I can actually pick those up from there, and then I'll just call them out. Right. Three, four, five. So that's 6 in total. That's councillors Danny, Tom, Chair, Ian, Brian, and Gary. So that's great. Then moving on then to, if I deal with breakfast clubs probably next, is anybody have
sorry, Wyn. Sorry, Chair.
Yep.
I'm having trouble. I can't find the hand thing, keeps disappearing, and the pictures keep jumping around the screen. So when I'm trying to click on it, it's just going. Is there a way of stopping that?
Not sure, Sarah. The hands, raised hands should be on the bar at the bottom in the middle of your Zoom screen. If
I
you
haven't
make,
got that. It must be the view I'm looking at. I'll try and have a go at it
Sometimes
now.
if you just move your cursor, the bar will reappear. If it's disappeared off your screen, just move your
Well,
cursor
the
around.
pictures keep moving. Every time I'm trying to click on me, I'm moving around somewhere else on the screen. Everybody's moving as they put in their hands up for me. I don't know whether that's the same for anybody else.
We got it on full screen view.
Yeah.
Is this okay?
Yeah. You need to use the little bars at the bottom off the pictures, Sarah, if that's possible, because as soon as somebody puts their hands up, they jump up in a queue across the top.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be working properly anyway. I think I need to probably declare. I don't. Is the £150 for the council tax rebate? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, that's it.
I think probably I may know somebody who's had it. I don't know.
That's fine. Okay.
Always best to declare if you're not
Yes,
sure. And then you'll
but
cover it.
that's a personal interest, not a prejudicial interest. So that's
Yeah.
fine on that one. In relation to breakfast clubs, does anybody have children or have close personal associates or family who would have children actually attending breakfast clubs? Again, that's a personal interest. So if you could indicate again, please. None at all, that's fine. And lastly, in relation to the other grants that are described in the report, would anybody be eligible? And again, it's yourself, family or close personal associates falling in or who could be eligible for receipt of those grants. Again, can you show, please? So Chair, Gary, Danny, Brian, right, okay. Oh, okay, those are personal and prejudicial interests when you get to that point. So what I'll have to do when we get to that element, we'll see how we go now through the report. I'll have to move the four of you to the waiting room for the meeting. Councillor Carl, you'll need to take over the meeting just for that element, please. And then once we've concluded that element, I can bring everybody back in again.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, item 4, any declarations of party whip? So this is to receive disclosures of prohibited party whips which a member has been given in relation to the meeting in accordance with section 78(3) of the Local Government Measure 2011. Okay, no. Okay, so item 5 is to scrutinise the discretionary cost of living support scheme, and this is pages 3 to 32 in our document pack, going by the large full pack numbers. So open to the floor, please. Questions for our officers. Okay, so I'll start us off. I would like to hear a little bit more about how the decision came to the discretionary extra awards. So if somebody were able to answer that.
Sorry, Chair, when you say discretionary extra awards, what do you mean specifically?
So in the second package of how we decided in whether which of the vulnerable groups were best placed to receive those.
Okay.
Free school meals, vulnerable young people, the
okay, so
etc.
Yeah. Okay. So we tried to identify, as mentioned in the report, we found an arbitrary approach wasn't going to work for Paris because of the nature of the council tax base. So we decided to look for vulnerabilities, whether that be vulnerability around circumstance, which is perhaps financial circumstances, or whether they have vulnerability around their personal situation, such as disability. So we then looked around all the various databases and the information that we hold to try and identify and establish those types of vulnerability, as we felt that was the better way to approach this, because we could test that somebody has a need or a vulnerability or a circumstance that might need further help. And then the other way that we wanted to test this was to engage the service areas, so children's services, adult social care, housing, when they come across a vulnerability and a cost of living crisis need, that we identify them there as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Adrian, you have a question.
Yes, it's just about the, I'd like a bit more of a definition of what off-grid means, basically, and how you arrived at the number of 1,000. Could you explain that a little bit more for me, please?
Yeah, certainly. So off-grid fuel supply is for those people that have LPG, gas, basically anything that isn't a standard gas supply that's attached to the house, or an electricity supply that's attached to the house. So we'd be looking to develop a scheme for those that are in perhaps on oil heating, LPG, that type of approach, so that we can support those, because obviously the cost of fuel for those types of heating are a lot higher than the standard utilities, even though we do appreciate people's costs are going up for the standard utilities too. There is an additional cost for those customers. The 1,000 was an estimate based on a discussion I had with housing. We tried to identify how many properties they felt could be across the county, but I have to say 1,000 is roughly an estimate of what we think there may be. There may be more, there may be less. We don't really know, for honest.
Okay, Councillor Adrian, you happy with that response?
Yeah, it's just also on that one, if somebody does qualify, I personally don't think they should be exempt from the main scheme.
Can I just comment on that, please, Chair?
Yes, okay, yes.
Yeah, on this question of the estimate, the 1,000, just as an example, I think there's a strong possibility that that might present a slight underestimation, but there is a caveat there, in so much as it'll be a panel decision, and it's only allowing the application if they've not received a grant already in the main scheme. But that's something that this panel that we propose to set up of councillors and officers will look into. But yes, you know, 1,000 on the face of it doesn't seem to be many, because just taking my ward as an example, there's nowhere in the ward that's on mains gas. It's all oil, solid fuel, or LPG gas. But I think the important point there is that it's a panel decision, and they'll review it.
Thank you, Councillor David.
But that is correct, thank you. Yeah, so the panel would review it. We can make a decision one way or the other whether we allow the main scheme and a discretionary one as well.
Okay, that answers the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Adrian. Councillor Anita.
Hello. Before I ask my question, I'd like to second that I think that might be an underestimation on the off-grid as well. In my rural area, I'd say the majority of the 1,000 residents, but I'm trying to remember the households are not on mains gas. So yes, I think there's going to be quite a few affected. My question was, has there been any sharing of ideas of best practice between local authorities? Because I appreciate that all local authorities are given the discretionary fund, and then it's up to them to decide their scheme. Do we know what other local authorities are doing?
Yeah, good question. We are sharing in sort of a All Wales group about the different schemes and the different approaches. RCT went very early with their scheme, and that's already up and running. The rest of the councils are going through the same process as we are at the moment of looking at this. the majority are going for all of the occupied exemptions. Some councils with their council tax bases are then going down the more arbitrary award route, so bandies perhaps, or they're looking at bigger groups within the tax base, but we are not able to do that because of the, as I said, the nature of our tax base. But after that, then they're looking then at vulnerable groups as well. So very similar approaches, as well as looking to support food banks and other local organisations that are supporting people directly with the cost of living. So we're pretty much on par. I think perhaps where we're slightly different is we're also looking to develop some energy efficiency responses in this as well. And there's also, we're trying to support people if they have mortgage difficulties through the housing side of things too. So I think those are perhaps where we're different, and perhaps trying to develop something a little bit more unique.
Thank you. Anita?
Great, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Matthew, I see you've just put your hand up. Did you want to add a comment to that?
Just in response to Councillor Anita's question, really, I think it's really important that we look at what our peers are doing across Wales and learn from them. But equally, there's flexibility within the discretionary scheme for us to be able to build a Powys solution and response to the cost of living crisis. And I think that's really important given the quite unique rurality that we've got here. So in response to the original paper that came to us as portfolio holders, there was some internal challenge. For example, talking to food banks about what they needed rather than a blanket loan, a blanket grant. Did they need something different? You know, did they need a system that would enable them to provide, you know, prepaid energy cards perhaps for their users and client group to be able to actually make use of what they provide? So discussion with the local organisations that are on the ground and delivering and responding to the cost of living crisis in Powys has been really important in helping to shape this package. I think we're in a place as well with the home loss prevention scheme. I don't think that's been done anywhere else in Wales. And that's come out because actually when I met with social registered landlords and housing providers in Powys, there was a discussion about a potential risk of people losing their homes because mortgage payments have been able to be deferred throughout COVID. Interest rates are now going up. And actually, if we can prevent those people who are owners losing their homes from banks and building societies, actually that could prevent more trauma and crisis further down the line. So the point that I really want to make is about the discretionary system giving us the flexibility to build a Powys focused response to the cost of living crisis.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay, Councillor Gary.
Thanks all. Yeah, I think I'll agree with Anita and others on the sort of off-grid stuff. Majority of my ward is certainly off-grid as well, so just can reconsider perhaps the figures or the estimates within that, but obviously I know you've got other priorities to think about. Two questions really. One was just a bit of a challenge around specifically actually food banks in my case. That's sort of my area of expertise. And the general concern I have is obviously we're putting money into sort of reactive solutions rather than being proactive, and you'll counter argue that with, we're supporting the organisations and the agencies that are out there trying to support others to change, but where we're looking at giving effectively direct grants to community groups or organisations that are just supporting the status quo, I've got a general fear over that. We've got to start to shift people away from the need of food banks and other organisations, and that can only really come with detailed on the ground support and support schemes. Too late to perhaps change the figures now, but I think I'd be generally interested in future rounds to really look at how actually money could be better spent in prevention rather than reaction, and particularly with food banks. So it's not really a question. I know you've been out there, you've talked to people and you've got some assessments, but my question on those is, where do we draw the line between food banks and food surplus projects? Because pretty much every larger community in Powys now has either a food bank or a food surplus project, and the two are quite different. And obviously we've listed an estimation of 11 in there, and that's the major towns in my opinion that are perhaps a registered trestle truss style food bank, but there's an awful lot of ground movement around food surplus projects. I don't know how we might consider that, David, within the figures or others.
Thank you. Yes, the 11 are in there in relation to the actual specific food banks. Yeah, I take the point around there's a lot of food surplus groups and other community stuff going on. So yeah, it's a good and valid point. The difficulty is, where do you draw the line with the money you've got? But I think it's something that we can take on board if, once we get through the main scheme, we're assuming there will be some money and availability from the main scheme, which we can then move across. And we've kind of got that break point in September where we can then look at what other funds we've got, what has not been taken up from the discretionary scheme, and then consider the second round at that point. That will give us a chance to look at that as well, definitely.
Yeah, great. And I'd encourage, obviously, some sort of evaluation process, if at all possible, on some of those grant systems that have gone out, just to see how's it been spent, where was the biggest impact, things like that. So that's great. My other question, if that's okay, Chair, to add another one in.
Go on then, yes.
Was just around communication, really. It's quite a complicated set of what we're trying to offer out to our residents, and even, I'll admit, I'm struggling to understand all of it. And we're definitely going to need some very clear communications out to our residents and to the community groups around this, and obviously general press releases, that's fine. But I guess I'm just concerned about the capacity within the comms team to get this right, because there's an awful lot in there. If somebody can give me some assurances that that's been worked on, that'd be great.
Yeah, I take the point. We've gone for a good variety to support a lot of vulnerabilities, but that then does create complexity in the organisation, which I do accept. So some of it will be straightforward in the sense of we can write to people directly because we know their situation and their circumstance. So somebody that's getting a disabled band reduction in council tax, for instance. So we have those details. We can very specifically write to those. So all of the means tested ones where we know the data, we can have those. On the ones there, we've got to let people know that this scheme is available, the off-grid scheme, for instance, home loss prevention, all those types of things. Yes, they'll need work with the comms team to do that, but it won't need to be the whole range of things that we're looking at. It will be a few key things that we need to do with the comms team.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Danny.
Hello. Mine's just a question about the energy efficiency work. It says installing photovoltaic panels and, where needed, battery backup systems. It also says where we have already undertaken some energy efficiency work. So would this, would it work for system upgrades, or is it new systems? Say you've got an outdated photovoltaic system, or because there's a lot better, newer systems out there nowadays. Just want some clarity on what this actually covers, if possible, please.
Yeah, we haven't really gone into a lot more depth around whether it would be a replacement.
Can I just stop you there as chair? I'm just wondering, Wynne, should I sit out here? Because if we're going to be talking about the renewable energy and off-grid schemes.
If this affects you directly in terms of that,
it
then,
might, yes.
Okay, then if you want to declare a person prejudicial at this point, that's fine, Chair. I'll make a note of that, and I'll move you out. And if Councillor Carl can then just take over, please, that will be fine.
I think that's wise. If we're heading into a deeper discussion on this subject, I think that's probably wise.
Okay, bear with me, Chair. Okay, that's fine. Councillor Carl, you okay?
Yep, cheers, Wynne. Yes,
okay.
Councillor Danny.
Hello, yes. I believe someone did start to answer my question. I can't remember who it was.
That's okay. That was me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David.
No worries. Yeah, so we haven't got into the detail of whether we'll be looking at upgrades or not. what we will have done is that the housing team will have worked with the homeowner, will have got an EPC up to a certain level, as I understand it. So we already know the homes, we know where there's still vulnerability issues as well for the resident. And then what we're then planning to do, where we've done some insulation work, perhaps for an example, like an air source heat pump, but it still isn't reducing the residents' costs in terms of their heating, and they need these additional measures to help support those reductions. Then we're looking to go in and do those voltaic even say the word at the moment, voltaic panels and battery backup solutions as well to supplement what's already gone in. Whether there is a need to look at some of the homes where fits have gone in on these panels and they're still not producing the enough energy reduction costs, then that may be a possibility, but we are of course limited in terms of funding. So that's something that I'll raise with the housing team to see if they know about those and which ones they may well be. But of course, we're trying to also identify vulnerable residents first through this scheme, because we're trying to keep this scheme around helping and supporting vulnerable residents first. So it's that fit too that we'll begin with before we go wider.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Okay. Thank you, Danny. Next up is Councillor Adrian Jones, please.
Yes, just one more question, please, Chairman, on the off-grid grants. Will all houses in any tax band be eligible? Because it implies, that's just for the ones that are in the main scheme by the wording. So just a clarification on that, please.
The ones that are we're planning to award the grant to those that got the off-fuel grid supply, grid supply. We were originally planning to basically, if you were getting a payment under the main scheme, you weren't going to get a secondary payment through this. So it was only for those initially where we were going to say, you've had the payment first, so you won't get them. If you've not got the payment under the main scheme, you will get a payment under this scheme. What we would then hope to do is then look at the wider circumstance and then say, even if you've qualified under the main scheme, we'll then consider the making an award. But we are limited in funding. So that's why we were hoping to focus initially on the group that haven't been awarded anything under the main scheme. But that will be a decision for the panel that we create, which will basically make a decision whether we award it, open it up to everybody, or whether we just focus on that group that haven't had anything yet. Does that help?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Councillor David Thomas, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just go back to the communications concern? That is picked up within the risk assessment, and there is mitigation put in there that does reduce that risk. But obviously the mitigation involves a full and effective communications process through partners and council services, and that's happening at the moment. So yes, it is a concern, and it is a complex package to communicate, but I think I'm fairly confident that we can get this communication out to the people who most need to be aware of it. So just to give some reassurance that it had been identified as a potential issue.
Okay, thank you, Councillor David Jones. Councillor Anita Cartwright, please.
Sorry, me again. I didn't realise I could ask two questions at the same time. I was waiting to see if somebody would ask my second question. But carrying on from comms, I was wondering how much thought's been gone into the process for delivery, because I'm sure I saw on the Welsh Government letter that the payments had to be made by September. Is that correct? Which doesn't leave obviously a huge amount of time. If there are a couple of things that came to mind is spotting duplicates, how onerous the application process would be. Obviously the grants process you know, grants processes tend to be quite complicated, but also for, you know, the off-grid residents, and whether we've really sort of worked through how we're going to get it delivered by September.
Thank you. Yeah, the main scheme has to be delivered by September. When the main scheme ends, like I say, then we'll then know what funding is then available to put into the discretionary scheme. Welsh Government have moved though on the discretionary scheme end date, and have said that they'd like us to complete it as soon as possible, but they haven't given us an end date now, which is a lot more flexibility, because there was a bit of a conflict because we couldn't work out what funds would be available from the main scheme until the end of September, because that's the end date for that. So yeah, so we've got some more flexibility now, which is very helpful. Does that answer the question? Was there anything?
Sort of. More about the process. You know, how much work's been done on planning the process.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was 2 questions, and yeah, the process itself is quite well structured. We've been sort of living in grants delivery in income awards for the last couple of years now, so quite a comprehensive infrastructure in place. So as an example, we did the winter fuel grants, and we've got an online form ready and available. It needs some work to be done to be ready to go, but to be honest, for the for that, we can then just amend stuff that we've already got and get the infrastructure in place and ready and set up quite quickly, to be honest. Totally agree. It needs to be as simple as possible as well, to make the application process as simple as possible, because we've got to get quite a lot of volume through. So we are planning to try and make the application process straightforward, doing some background checks, but yeah, we're quite ready to go on the schemes because of what we've done previously.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Danny Bett, please.
Hello. It's just a question on the bottom of 2.3. It says about supporting transport and fuel initiative for rural communities. I just wondered how you intended on doing that, because the cost of fuel is going up so drastically, it would almost be impossible to put a figure to that. It very rarely comes down, but it only ever stops going up quite so fast. And well, yeah, that's the question, really, to be honest.
Thank you. Yeah, the section 2.3, I agree. Sorry, can I just say, I agree. It very rarely goes down. That's an observation. Section 2.3 is in the report is what Welsh is just sort of an indicative of what Welsh Government gave us as guidance for the types of things that we might want to include in a discretionary scheme. They don't, all of those things don't have to be done, but they're guides as to the sorts of things we might want to consider. So we haven't got a transport initiative or fuel scheme specifically, but we are a rural community. Again, partly because of, we have a certain amount of funding, and it will only go so far, as you can see, amongst all the things that we're trying to deliver already. But it wasn't something specific that we had to do. It's something we could do if we felt we could.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I understand that. Yeah, because everyone's like myself. Nowhere is close to anywhere for any of us, really, is it? No. So we all have to travel.
And but there's quite a lot of flexibility. So in the scheme, for instance, we've got a pot of money that's going to all the services. So if anyone presents with a vulnerability issue to any of the services, the key service areas, they have the ability to help somebody with a cost. So an example was given to me by Children's Services. They said, could we help somebody pay for the cost of getting to a hospital appointment because they can't afford to do that? And I said, yes, you can. So there's, on that individual basis, if the service area is happy that that's a cost of living cost that they want to help with from the pot of money that they get, then they can give that individual support, which can cover those things like fuel. But there's not a specific scheme in there for fuel, I do accept.
No, that's a good system.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that. Yeah, well, thanks for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe Jane, you had your hand up. Jane Thomas, 151 officer.
I did, thank you, Chair. It was just to confirm in terms of the end date, and I think this is testament to the work that officers in David's group have done, but also Welsh Treasurers. We have lobbied very hard to get that date extended. So they have now moved that to the 31st of March, which we had confirmation of yesterday. So that's really good news. The only thing I just wanted to make everybody aware, and it doesn't respond to a question, but obviously with any scheme where you have applications, there is a risk of fraud around people trying to claim as well. And we want to make sure that it is only the people that really deserve the support and are identified accordingly get that. So I just want to give assurance to everybody as part of the grants process that we've developed over the last couple of years. We've got quite a robust system in place to tease out everything that we need to in terms of preventing fraud wherever we can. So I just wanted to add that really. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. No other hands up? No. Okay, we'll go to the recommendation. Is that correct, Wynne?
Shall I bring the chair back in if we've completed that bit?
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, good idea. Oh, Councillor Matthew Dorrance, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make a final comment, really, that this paper hasn't actually gone to Cabinet or Executive Management team yet, but I felt it was really important that we listen to what Scrutiny have to say about the proposals. And what I'm particularly keen to hear is whether you think we've got the balance right, whether you think that it's targeted enough, and whether you think that we've got the appropriate controls in place to ensure that it's successful. I think this is a really positive scheme. It's likely to be over £1 million targeted to some of our most vulnerable residents and communities to alleviate the pressures of the cost of living crisis. But it is really important, I think, that Scrutiny get to see this before a formal decision is made on it.
My only observations, Councillor Matthew, would be I've got 1,500 electors in my ward, and pretty much all of them, well, all of them, 100% of them are off-grid. And I would urge you for home heating to move over your focus to away from fossil fuels, because obviously we are moving in that direction and grants need to be available for ground source and air source heat pumps, as well as photovoltaic. There's opportunities now for, really good battery technology and storage of water, heated water as well. And there's a lot of very interesting technology which you can charge your car as well as charge your hot water, and you can play around with that, and whichever is more important to you, you can there's units out there that can decide on where that charge goes to. And I would urge the council, the new cabinet, to look down that avenue over fossil fuels.
Thanks.
Welcome back, Chair. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Thank you very much, Carl. So I hope you all feel you've had a thorough and robust discussion on that matter, and obviously I couldn't take part in that. So let's continue. Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Chair. Matthew, I think in direct response to your sort of well-made point, certainly from my point of view, I can see that you put a huge amount of consideration, you and the officers and those leading on this, to all those different areas of vulnerability, and tried your hardest to split that money across all of those vulnerable categories. So yeah, well done. It's a pretty big task, and I think you've achieved it quite well, and you've laid it out as clearly and as plainly as you can to us. So yeah, well done for doing that. I think, as we've talked about, the next phase is delivery on it, and that's great, and you've got that in hand. So yeah, just wanted to say well done. There's a lot of work gone into that.
Okay, Councillor Sarah.
Hi, I just wanted to add that having worked on funded projects previously, and I know we've had an extension on the time that the money can be spent, but I think we need to take serious account of the fact that if people don't come forward and apply for these grants, that I don't know what time you want to give it, but we need to be really looking at what we're going to do with the money if it's left over. And I can see there possibly being quite a substantial amount left over because we're relying on people to apply. And as we're mentioning, we're talking about the most vulnerable in our communities, and it's not often easy for them to apply for the money. And even with all the support that we've got available in the authority, it isn't enough to spread across the whole communities, you know, about all the membership of powers that we've got. So I think you need to take into account that if there is money left by the end of the year, we need to be making some serious decisions where we can spend it otherwise. And I realise, sorry, that it's you know, there are going to be people, and we're told, you know, I don't want to go on about, you know, the renewables, but there's a lot of people that have had renewable installations by Houps that have already on the second, you know, and we're talking in 10 years, they're on the second air source heat pump, and as something that's supposed to be future-proofed and providing you know, less outgoings for people. They're not, you know, that isn't less outgoing if we're having to change them every 5 years.
I can see that Jane Thomas has just put her hand up. Do you want to mention something on finance to us, Jane? Is that relevant?
It was really, you know, I think we'll monitor the delivery of the scheme over all the months. We won't leave that till year end, and where we need to adjust the funding pots between categories. I'm sure that's something we can look at. We'll see whether we need approval to do that or whether we can just do that freely. But obviously we want to make sure that we use every penny we've got for this scheme and to help our residents. So I can just give you that assurance.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Danny.
Hello. Just an example. If there's somebody in my ward that's a vulnerable person that's got no family and they're not sure how to apply for any grant or any such funding, what would be, or who would be an acceptable person to nominate them for a grant? Like for instance, would a county councillor be acceptable to nominate them for a grant, or would that be frowned upon?
No, because the eligibility is based on their entitlement to the grant. So under the main scheme rules, for instance, if that person lived in a band A to D, they're eligible for the grant. So if you have somebody in your ward that says that is in band A to D, then you should be saying to them, yes, do apply if they haven't yet done so or not received the payment. So no, definitely making sure that you know, the residents in your ward are all aware. Definitely sort of have those conversations with them and encourage them to apply if they haven't yet done so. With regards to eligibility under the discretionary scheme, we will be contacting all of those that we can do directly, as I've said. The ones, of course, where there's vulnerability and they present themselves to the council in some fashion or form, we'll be able to see that when they come and present themselves to us. So, but if there's a part of the scheme, assuming it all gets approved as is, and you feel that there's a resident that hasn't had a payment under anything else, then there's no reason why you can't encourage them to apply, because that's what this scheme is for people to support in our communities with the cost of living crisis. So definitely do that, yes.
Yeah, okay. So say they was having trouble applying themselves for some reason they couldn't do it themselves. Could a councillor make the application for them or involve someone from the council to come and make the application for them?
We have a system in place at the moment where we have a team of officers who are there doing grants all day. They pick up calls from people who are struggling to apply, so they'll deal with those customers. They'll actually complete the application for them over the phone. They'll actually do the online for them as an assisted form. It depends what the person's circumstances are. We've also, in a few cases, If they're able, they've gone to the local libraries, and the libraries teams, the customer service points in libraries are also there and available too. So we've got phone support, email support, but we generally to help people with their applications ourselves. So you just need to give them our contact number for the support team, and we'll help them.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. Thanks for clearing that up.
Thank you, Councillor Danny. So Councillor Carl now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the comment from Councillor Sarah Williams regarding air source heat pumps. She is correct in that when you have extremely cold temperatures, air source heat pumps do tend to give up the life a little bit earlier than they should do. I would urge Councillor Matthew to look at ground source heat pumps. They're a lot more expensive. The installation costs are hugely a lot more expensive, but they do tend to last a lot longer. Obviously, with the cost of renewables coming down, that may be something that could be looked at. I'm not sure, but I want to congratulate you, Matthew, on the scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Carl. Councillor Tom, or does Councillor Matthew, did you want to come back on that?
No, I think that they're all really important comments, and I'm making notes as we go through, but I suspect the scrutiny will want to make recommendations to Cabinet based on its discussion, and I think they're important to be reflected there.
Thank you. Councillor Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, good scheme, very supportive. Jane Thomas's point about monitoring, that's clearly going to have to happen. There will, I'm sure, be a need to move money from pot to pot, because this is just a first estimate, obviously, and things will need some flexibility as things become clearer. I think that you should have the latitude to move money from pot to pot, because that will be required. I don't think you should have to come back for a further approval on that. I think you should just be given that approval now, frankly, because it's bound to happen. It's bound to be the case. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Councillor Danny.
Hello, it's just about going back to Carl's point about the possibility of ground source. We've just got to remember about how much area that the ground source does take up. It's not suitable for many places because, as I understand it, to be effective, you need quite a lot of area. It's so many kilowatts per meter. I can't remember the exact figures, but to make it effective, it's quite a large area needed.
Okay, good point. Thank you. Councillor Carl, you've got your hand up again.
Coming back on that one, Chair, yeah, Danny is correct, but there's also the opportunity, if there isn't the floor space out in your backyard, to go in a borehole. So there is chances of doing that as well. But like I say, the installation costs on ground source are quite a bit more than air source.
That's interesting. I didn't know you could do it with a borehole. You learn something new every day. Thank you.
Right, thank you, gentlemen. Councillor David Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to get involved in a debate on air source heat pumps because I know very, very little about them, to be honest. But no, just to back up what Jane Thomas, the 151 officer, said, with regard to any underspend, it's actually covered in the report under section 3.3, and it does refer to officers and councillors when we were talking about a panel earlier in the debate. But it actually covers most of the concerns that were expressed by Councillor Sarah and others. Just to point that out, Chair. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor David. That actually brings me round to the chance to ask my question, which was going to be, has this panel been set up yet?
No, it hasn't. We're waiting for approval process to go to Cabinet first of all before the panel's is sorted and set up.
But the process is in order for you to be able to do that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So from the committee, do we have any further questions? Okay, well, I had a couple of questions, and mine was around the stakeholders that were engaged with. And I think from the report, it looks like you've spoke to just about everybody available, but I did wonder about community support groups who are very localized. We have a few of them throughout Powys, and they do have their sort of finger on the pulse, perhaps more with the older generation, but I just wondered if they'd had any input.
No, we didn't. Oh, sorry.
I think that's a really important question, Chair. And what we did do is engage with PAVO, who's the umbrella organisation representing the third sector. I think there's been extensive engagement with voluntary organisations, statutory services, and others. It is important that we take as much learning and advice from our communities as we can. But I think as we develop with this, I think it'll be really important for local members to feed in those community maps. I don't think the council has enough knowledge about all those voluntary organisations that are running in communities, which is why we rely very heavily on our statutory third sector partner in PAVO.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And obviously they would have links to all those groups. It's just, as you say, the detailed local knowledge, isn't it? Okay, thank you very much for that. My other question was, in the report, it mentioned about the possibility for individuals in HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, being able to apply as individuals. And that isn't mentioned in the Powys report. I wondered, do we not have many HMOs in Powys?
We have about three. Sorry, I think it's about 300 HMOs in total. Yeah, so we don't have a great deal, no, but we didn't include them in the scheme because we talked to housing about whether we needed something specific for HMOs, and they felt because they have a lot of contact through their work in the private sector team, they felt having the funds would enable them to deliver support to those that are vulnerable, specifically in a HMO one. But that's why we didn't then expand that into a specific HMO route to apply.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, unless anybody else has a question, I think we've covered all the things that we highlighted in our pre-meeting and that have come out through the course of this conversation. So no more comments or questions on this item. Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank the officers for their input there and their responses, and for a very good report. Thank you very much. So we move now to item 6 on the agenda, which is the working group recommendations, pages 33 to 34 of your agenda pack. So we need to, many of us on this committee are new, so weren't involved in this report. So I don't know if there's anybody who was on this committee previously that would like to sort of talk us through this. It's the Buying Homes Working Group. Or perhaps Wynne, you better lead us through this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, all the members, 2 are now cabinet members and the other members no longer a member of council. So it was one of the specific items or areas that committee decided it wanted to look at in terms of how we go around purchasing private sector properties, which are then used for, obviously, for housing. And because there was some concerns about, there was a particular property which had been purchased, but then we discovered wasn't suitable for adaptation, and was subsequently sold. But again, that was fine because actually it was sold not at a loss to the council, I think, from memory, to that one. So the working group was satisfied, in fact, about the process that we had in play as a council. There were a couple of areas and things that they considered perhaps we ought to be included, such as electric car charging points in there. And they also welcomed some of the things, such as, you know, the calculations are looking at a 60-year payback for any properties purchased, etc. And they made a couple of recommendations then to the cabinet. So if committee is happy with that, I'll then forward this on to the cabinet for consideration, and we'll see what response we get back from the cabinet.
Okay, thank you. So the committee, did you have any comments to make on this report? No. I mean, I was very pleased to see the accessibility was highlighted in there, and obviously the key part was the funding. So shall we move to accept this report? Should we do a show of hands, Win? Would that be the...
That's fine, Chair.
Okay, everybody could raise their hand if they're happy to accept this report.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Okay. Actually, I feel I should go back to item 5, because there should be some actions from the discussion on the discretionary cost of living support scheme, and I feel we should be probably making some recommendations. So on page 11 of the report, again in the large pack, large number 11, there were some recommendations at the end, and we probably should be approving those, shouldn't we? I beg your pardon, I rushed on, didn't I, before I'd completed that section?
Not necessarily the recommendations, Chair, but I think, as Councillor Matthew has said, I'd value some views from the committee about, do they feel the scheme is balanced? Do they feel that it actually addresses as best you can, obviously with the funding that we've got, the areas that we need to be tackling? And I think some members have already highlighted that, yes, I think that's right. Is the flavour I'm getting out of it, probably subject to members' comments. Any other comments or things perhaps we ought to be, the Cabinet ought to be looking at? And there's a few things I'll pull out from the discussion this morning, but if there's anything you particularly want to highlight as members, please say now so I can actually just make a note of them.
I mean, for guidance, under item 9, there are 3 recommendations written into the report. So would it make sense to add to or extend those? Councillor Anita has got her hand up, actually. Would you like to speak, Councillor Anita?
Apologies, that was left up.
Oh, right, a legacy hand, we call that. Councillor Carl.
Thank you, Chair. I believe Councillor Matthews is looking to see if we think it's a balanced report. I do think it is, and I move, Chair, to take the recommendations 9.1, 9.2, 9.2 again. I believe that should be 9.3. And I'm happy to move that and to accept it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carl. Councillor Adrian, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Chair, I agree with Carl, it's a balanced report, but I would be keen to see that, it's mentioned about the rural fuel crisis, and there's limited scope when the funds available, I agree, but other than the off-grid grants, but I would encourage the Cabinet to make sure that some of that box is ticked with any funding. I know they mentioned transport to hospitals, etc. But if there's an overspend on the off-grid and some of the money isn't available, the rural fuel crisis isn't being looked at really in the whole pack. That's just my observation. Other than that, I think it's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adrian. Councillor Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. And I think the report has been written more for Cabinet, and I think it's been tabled for scrutiny to consider the report that will appear at Cabinet. So I think item 9, unfortunately, is the recommendations that Cabinet will be asked to decide upon. But it is important that you make recommendations on the report global, if you like. I took a lot away from members' discussion around the estimate around the off-grid properties in Powys. And I think that's important. So I'm really keen to hear those sorts of things, really, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Matthew. That's very helpful for me as Chair in having that guidance in what those where they were being aimed. So Councillor Carl again.
I would just add to that that my neighbouring councillors, pretty much left, right, up and down, if you're looking at the map, are all off-grid as well. So just to take that on board as well, Councillor Matthew.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carl. Councillor Jackie, hello.
Thank you. I just really wanted to say thank you for the discussion. I think it's been a really interesting discussion this morning. I'm particularly keen as well on the energy efficiency work which has been included in this, and I think that's the right place for it to go. And also interested in the comments that have been made. I also wonder whether we could at some point, I'm not asking for a recommendation, but I will be asking the Cabinet to consider this when the report comes forward, is how we're contributing to our net zero carbon targets as well. And I think it might be really useful to find a way of fitting that in here. And it might also help with the fuel crisis as well. I'm not quite sure how yet, but there might be some elements in there which we could link up. But just to thank everybody for a very good discussion here this morning. It's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jackie. Okay, so Wynne will put some comments for us to move forward. I think the general consensus is that we're rather pleased with that report. We think it's a very good report, and there needs to be a stronger emphasis on the off-grid section of it and the environmental impacts of that. So moving forward then to item number 7, which is the work programme for the ERC Scrutiny Group. So we're on page 35 of the full pack. So Wynne, do you want to talk us through?
Thank you, Chair. This is currently the draft programme. Couple of elements to this, perhaps I need to just talk you through. Obviously, in July, I need to set up now in July, and we need to actually do this again next year. I'll get the dates in diary shortly. So work programming sessions, because what I'd like to do is just that we keep reviewing as a committee the work program to make sure that it's obviously live, relevant for what we need to do. The other elements I think which are important here are I'll be setting out dates as well for pre-meetings. So once an agenda has been issued, we will be holding quick pre-meetings just between officers and the committee itself to look at just getting ready and prepared and questioning strategies, etc., in advance of the meetings themselves. So there are a few items in there. The July meeting, I've been notified this morning of a potential additional item, so I need to look at that because that will need to go to the Cabinet the following day, which is fine. We've got a few items in there then for the rest of the year, but I think we do need to now plan, as we've got a new committee, plan what we need to do. And again, Nigel and I were discussing this yesterday. We need to have identification as well from the various heads of service as to what's coming forward, what are their priorities over the next 12 months, and what needs to be scrutinized, because obviously, as I've said previously to members in training sessions, we can't do everything. So it's needing to just focus on a few items per meeting, plus some of the routine ones we do on a regular basis. And then hopefully we'll have an interesting program for members to look at.
Okay, so the dates currently in that programme, so the 11th of July for a work programming session.
Yeah.
So that's self-explanatory. The 21st of July being Royal Welsh Show Week, and a date that I can't personally attend. Is that going to go ahead?
We'll probably need to adjust that, Chair,
yeah, on
there. Yes, I'm trying to avoid show week if I can. So we might need to move things around. It might be
a bit tight,
not quite sure how we're going to do that as yet, but we'll fathom something out.
Somebody's got their hand. No, there's a comment in the chat. Let me just check what that is.
That was a comment from Councillor Sarah.
Ah, Councillor Sarah. Right. Okay. Right. I think that concludes our business for the day. So thank you very much. Oh, Nigel, hello.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm sorry to come into the death there. Just waiting the most appropriate opportunity. Clearly, we'll pick up work programming, as you said there, on the 11th. But it is a paper we would be looking to bring forward on the 25th, which would be Shared Prosperity Fund. I mean, we can discuss it there, you know, at both meetings, but early heads up really, just to, and I know several members of the committee have been involved in some of the work on that already in terms of the working group, and the intention is to take it to Cabinet on the following day. just because of the time frames we're up against. But we can discuss that separately, but early heads up if that's okay, Chair, on that point.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I must say, I just want to say a thank you to all the officers that have turned out for the meeting today. Thank you very much for coming along. It's much appreciated. And perhaps I should apologise for my ham-fisted chairing of the meeting. It can only get better, guys. So if there is no more business of the day, do we close the meeting, Wyn?
We'll stop the recording, Chair, and close. And afterwards, the committee is asked just members of the committee themselves, just to stay with us for about 5-10 minutes, just to have a quick reflection section on how you feel today went.
Thank you very much.
So if I stop the recording now.